All right, I'd invite you to take your Bibles with me tonight and turn to the book of Proverbs, chapter 19. We've got some verses we want to look at tonight, things that I think will help us, Lord willing, and just looking forward to that. So last week, just to back up a little bit, we'll do a short review, make sure we're all kind of on the same page as where we've come from and where we'll be tonight. We began in verse number 12, and again, just a real quick recap, just to remind us of what we've talked about is, in verse number 12, we just talked about how we need to be careful about the way we interact with people that are in authority over us, right? There's a very real sense in which people in authority over you have a lot of influence in your life, they either for good or for bad, right? And to the best of our ability, I'm not talking about compromise, not talking about not doing what's right. I'm just talking about doing everything you can to keep the king from being angry and the lion from roaring in our life. What do I have to do to keep people in authority happy without violating morals? I think would be go without saying. We then moved to verse number 13, spent a few minutes here talking about a foolish son is the calamity of his father. I would really kind of every time I read it, I feel like I'll think about this from now on, but it says it's the calamity, and I think there's a very real sense in which you go through life and I'm trying to remember. I was listening to a message just on the radio, and I was going somewhere, and I don't remember who wrote a book, but it was somebody, and the first three words of the book were "life is hard," right? And he was going to preach about Job, but he started with that. And life is hard, right? I mean, I think that we could all write a book, we could all start it like that on some level, but I do think that, especially in specific context to this verse, a foolish son makes it's just a level that really nothing else matters. Almost like my kids are being foolish, stupid, idiotic, unbiblical, amoral, not listening to me, not listening to God. And really, when you're thinking about that, dealing with it, engaging with that, almost nothing else in life is even that big of a deal, right? Every other problem that you've had, you gladly take all of those plus some, as long as your kid would do what he's supposed to do. And so it is the calamity of his father. We talked about the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping, spoke to the women just for a few minutes, and discussed the fact of, you get a lot of say on what goes on in your home. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Enough to where multiple times when Proverbs starts specifically dealing with women, he says, he starts really kind of narrowing down on this idea of contentious and brawling. And women need to be careful about that. And you say, well, you don't know my husband. You're right. I didn't pick them either, though, right? So we got to take all that into consideration as well. And really, most of life is like this. And I don't mean to put too much of a negative spin on it, but most of life is just kind of accepting where it's at and doing the best you can with what you can, where you're at, who you're with. If you can't learn to kind of cope in that manner, and if I could just put a very fine point on it, as I am wont to do, and women, keep your mouth closed more often, and cut down on the contention and strife and difficulty in your house, well, you're going to have issues or not, which is also just as bad sometimes. And so we just have to be aware of that. It's important for us to be aware of that. I think verse 14 that we talked about, it's at least in the same vicinity. It talks about how houses and riches are the inheritance of fathers. You get a prudent wife from the Lord. And I tied it together just in the most general sense of, your parents can leave you a lot of money. They can leave you a lot of wealth. They can take care of you and never have to work a day in your life. And your wife can make it completely all very miserable, right? And you say, well, a husband can make it miserable too. I'm not the one who wrote Proverbs, right? I'm just telling you, this is the context of what he's saying here. Women have the ability to undo a lot of happiness that a man could do. Take all this in context. Maybe we don't want to record this one, I don't know. But, right, you understand what I'm saying, right? It matters the type of women that we are, and it matters the type of way that we interact. We looked at verse number 15, talked about laziness. And basically, if you're lazy, you're going to end up hungry and you got what you deserve. That's basically what the Bible's saying. Don't be lazy. It's really not that. I guess you got to work hard to not be lazy. So can't say necessarily it's not that hard, because that's like literally what you have to do is work hard. But what I'm saying is it's not like laziness is something you can control completely, right? You can't necessarily, really honestly, you can't hardly control anything in life, but you can control how hard you work. You can control how much of an effort you put forth in everything, and you ought to be putting in quite a bit. Verse number 16, we talked about just the fact that if you'll do what you're supposed to do, your life will be better for it. I don't mean to diminish or to reduce what's going on, the importance of it. But he's saying, listen, keeping commandments, obeying what you ought to be doing. Listen, we all know what's right. I look around tonight, we're in a well-churched group of people, right? It is a very rare occasion indeed where you genuinely come up to get something like, I have no idea what to do here. Somebody makes you mad. You know what you're supposed to do when somebody makes you mad. Not get mad, right? I'm just on a general statement. You're not supposed to be bitter. You're not supposed to be angry. You're not supposed to start fights. You're supposed to be loving and charitable. Like, I mean, you kind of take a few little basic things that the Bible says, and you got a lot of your life kind of nailed down for you. And if you'll do that, you're keeping your own soul. There's a, let me put it in a negative sense, there's a certain personal benefit for you to do what's right. It's beneficial to you. That does bring us to verse number 17, where we'll pick up. Not going to be covering all of the chapter tonight unless I just can't fathom it, right? So verse number 17, read it with me. He that hath pity on the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again. So let's define a few words, and then we'll kind of think about what this verse is saying. The word pity means to show favor, to be gracious, to deal mercifully, to help someone in need, to give freely out of compassion. And unfortunately, that's exactly what I was worried that pity meant, right? Like I read that definition, I'm like, yeah, that's literally what I was worried that pity was going to mean. This word lendeth here, you're familiar with that idea as well. To furnish something with the expectation of repayment, right? To place another on an obligation to repay. We understand what it means to lend. My guess is, I look around, maybe not everybody, but probably most of us owe somebody something, even if it's a light bill for next month, right? We understand that context. And so those are the definitions that I think are important here. And he says, he that hath pity on the poor. And I've thought, even as we've gone through Proverbs, I've thought a lot about this. And it's really kind of challenged what my default state is, which is probably a good thing, right? Because my default in this area is probably not great. And it's most of the time, I'm going to say most of the time, I can't find an exception to it. But let me just put it like that. When the Bible is talking about poor people and the way that we interact with them, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find examples where it said, poor people that are only poor because they never made a bad decision in their life. Because poor people that don't have mental health issues, you realize probably a lot of the homeless people you interact with, there's some mental health. I'm using that in the most broadest sense of the term. There could be spiritual activity going on, but there could be something genuinely wrong with people or not, and they don't have the help that they need, whether spiritually or otherwise. Most people make bad decisions, right? It's hard to end up homeless, right? I mean, I just ask you a question. Have you ever made a bad decision in your life? Money, financially, just kind of life decisions. Raise your hand if you ever made a bad decision. All right. You don't have to raise your hand to this because at some point it get awkward, right? Have you made a lot of bad decisions in one sense, right? Like if I said, tell me all the poor financial decisions you've ever made, most of us would probably have more than we could even remember, right? On some level, unless you're just amazing, and if so, get up with me, right? But you understand what I'm saying. So you've made bad decisions, poor decisions, and all of y'all are going home to a house tonight. Right, so all I'm saying is you got to try really hard to be homeless, right? It's not just I messed up one little thing one little time and now I don't have a house, right? This is a systemic issue. So I say that not to caveat it, but to help us understand. When you see a poor person, you can go through a whole litmus test. Well, why are you poor? What difference does it make? The reality is a poor, hungry person. You know what they are? A poor, hungry person. My guess is, generally speaking, Texas City's got a lot of homeless people in it, like in a weird way, like more than you would perhaps think. Freeport has, you ever walked into a convenience store and somebody's like, hey man, can you give me a couple of dollars, a cup of coffee, so I can get something to eat, something to drink? Do you realize that probably, generally speaking, they're actually probably hungry and thirsty? Right? And all I'm saying is, the Bible says here, he that hath pity upon the poor. Listen, I look around and I also see a group of people that have no issues with dissecting. Let's talk about why you're poor, right? And why you have made all these bad decisions. And what are you really going to do with the money? The Bible says have pity on the poor. The interesting thing about pity is, generally speaking, it's not really deserved. Right, I think of the story, I don't know if it was Bartimaeus, but it's definitely adjacent to that in the New Testament. And it was the blind man outside of Jericho, and he hears Jesus coming, and you realize he says, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy upon me. And it's a very close, he's just saying, have some pity on me, right? Pity is not something that, oh, you deserve pity. No, it's something that I need, probably because I've made poor decisions in my life. So the poor does need pity. Does it matter does the kind of poor people matter? I would say, generally speaking, the Bible does not place a litmus test on the path to poverty. I said it, a hungry homeless man or woman is a hungry homeless man. It does say here, he that hath pity upon the Lord lendeth unto the Lord. Well, I mean, that puts a different theology on it a little bit, because, I've helped people before, right? It's the one that comes immediately to mind. I said, I totally know I got taken advantage of. It's like income tax back time. We were in Pearland or something, 15 years ago, and some kid came up and he had a good story laid out. I don't even remember the story. All I know is it got $100 out of me, right? And I don't know that I believed him. I knew I had money, right? I'd gotten a tax, and I said, you know what? I'd probably being scammed, but I felt good when I got done giving him the money. I don't know why he went off. I don't know how much of the story was true. And I think that we need to get away from, sitting there and saying, well, let's talk about this and let's think about this and let's dissect this. Say, I'm going to give this hungry homeless person that asked for $5, asked for something to eat, I'm just going to give them cash. Whatever they do with that's between them and God. But I'm viewing this as an act of service to my God. I see a person in need, and I'm not going to ask them 20 questions. I'm not going to ask them to fill out a questionnaire. I'm not going to ask them to take a drug test. I'm not the government. I'm not their employer, right? I see somebody in need. I want to help them. Can I help them? Can I do anything here? And not because that person is deserving, not because that person's made all the good decisions in their life, not because that person has never done anything wrong, not because that person asked the right way or this, that, or the other. I'm doing it because I love God. I love the Lord. This is the reason I'm going to have pity on people. If you see what the end of the verse says, and that which he hath given, will he pay him again? I read that and I'm like, okay, well, it can't really mean exactly what it seems like it means, because you understand what I'm saying. And I think but I would argue that, man, you ought to just kind of take it at face value. God will take care of people who are generous to people that are less fortunate than them. I would point this out before we move on. When Jesus helped people, he never gave them a questionnaire beforehand. Just stay with me. When Jesus helped you, he didn't ask for a lot. He didn't ask a bunch of questions. Remember when you came to Jesus and asked for help? He just helped you. He does that today. I mean, think of how many times in the last 10 years since you've been saved that you've ran to Jesus, and literally it was something along the lines, I did it again, right? I've messed it up. I've got this issue. I got this struggle. I got this thing. And if I don't want to get too far removed of what we're talking about here, but God's never said, well, no, I don't trust, I don't this, that, or the other. You can diagnose poor people or you can help poor people. And honestly, I look around and most of us are probably more qualified to help than diagnose. Just help, be willing to have pity upon poor people. I don't think people ever go broke being generous. That's probably, I don't think any of us are borderline of, well, if I give you this $5, I don't get to eat. Now, you may not get to eat that lunch, but overall, this is not what we're talking about here. I have a few cross references before we move on, but we're going to be lucky to finish 2 verses tonight. Okay, let me just give you these cross references. He that oppresseth the poor reproacheth his maker. Approacheth is a cross between oppressing and reproaching all at the same time. He that oppresseth the poor reproacheth his maker. Proverbs 18, we'll talk about it more when we get there in 4 or 5 years. He that giveth unto the poor shall not lack, but he that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse. You ever walk past the poor people and intentionally didn't look at them? He that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse. So you take that for what it will. Verse number 18. Let's move to verse number 18. We gotta make some territory here on family. Verse number 18. Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. The word chasten means exactly also what you mean. I'm kind of the way that I've morphed the way that I'm kind of handling some of the material. So I normally, when I pull up a verse, I basically try to find really 3 words, depending on the verse, maybe 2, maybe 4, and I'm just going to define them. Even if I don't necessarily give it to you, I want to know what they say. And almost without fail, I look up a word and like, that's exactly what I thought it meant. And chasten is one of them. To discipline through corrective instruction or punishment in order to reform conduct. Hope is a prospect of a favorable outcome. The word spare means to allow an inward desire or emotion to prevail. That talks about chastening thy son. I think that it's important, this word chasten, it's not, it carries more the idea than just a rebuke. It's not just completely verbal. There's a physical aspect to it, if I could put it like that, right? It requires both of them, right? This is involved in it. I would argue that it involves the rod, it involves correction, right? I think there's a balance there, and depending on the age of the child, the offense that has been proffered by them, it depends a lot. My mom, and I mean this with all respect, I'm not even trying to be funny, even though it could very possibly come across. My mom had a gift growing up of, I'd rather have the spanking instead of the talking to that I'm in the process of getting, right? Like, whoop me and let's move on, right? And I say that my mom still had that ability, and I think there was value to it. It's not that she had any issues with giving spankings. Don't mistake my inference there. But what I'm saying is as a parent, you have a responsibility to not just every time they do something wrong just to wail them. If they need to be wailed on, that's one thing. But every once in a while, you need to tell them why you're going to wail them. Tell them why you're wailing them, and tell them why you wailed them when you got right. There's reason to explain, like to where the kids should never get spanked. I don't understand what happened. Well, let me elucidate for you why you just got a spanking, right? Because there ought to be a reason that you can put into a pretty succinct sentence. So, the rod and correction, it says, while there is yet hope, you realize that you get to the point where they don't care what you say and you can't touch them anymore because it'd be domestic assault, right? And rightfully so. I mean, you got a 20-year-old kid, you can't go and wail them. You're probably going to have issues outside of your home at that point, and probably at some point, rightfully so. All I'm saying is, it gets to the point. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I look around at a room full of people that have gotten to the point where there's nothing else I can do. I've talked to them. I did spank them, and we have to understand. The important thing to do here is everything you can do when you can do it, because there always gets to a point where I can't do anything else. I mean, this happens with your children. It happens with people that you know. I'm at the extent of my ability to inflict anything that you care about anymore. And same on the kid. But all I'm saying is you should do what you can while you can, because at some point there's just not hope. It says, let not thy soul spare for his crying. I would argue that means kids are supposed to cry sometimes. Yes. You should inflict things on them that cause them to cry. And I think a few things about this. You realize the adult world will not spare for your child's crying. The police will not spare for their crying. I've mentioned a few times that I watch body cam footage and everything, and every once in a while it'll be a younger person, and you can tell by the way they're interacting and starting to cry. And I'm like, this is a kid who their parents spared for their crying, and they're meeting somebody that could not possibly care less. And not everybody goes to jail. Not everybody has a bad run-in with the police. But I'm saying that there will be a police officer one day that crying will not get them out of trouble. Judges won't spare for their crying. Bosses, generally speaking, aren't going to spare for your crying. You realize that most bosses want to get rid of crybabies? Now, it may take them a while, and they may have to play the HR game, but most people don't want people like that working for them. Bills, people you owe money to will not spare for your crying. I mean, have you ever owed anybody money going to be late, and you call and say, I'm just going to cry, and then they'll cut me some slack. Could not possibly care less. Go to your bank and cry and say, I don't know what I was thinking when I bought the car and the house. Can we just act like it never happened? They'll be like, I think you need to leave. right there. They would not care one little bit. And in fact, you'll just make the water cooler talk for the next 3 weeks. This lady was in my office crying for their, right? Nobody's going to care. And so parents do their children a disservice when you spare for their crying, because the world will not. And ultimately, God won't spare for their crying. Amen. Everybody's going to stand before God, and there ain't going to be any level of excuses and crying and blubbering and everything that's going to make any difference. I remember growing up, it was a young man. It was a kid. We were all kids, and Dad was watching them, and we were at home, and he asked, "Hey, can we do this?" I said, "Nah, I ain't gonna." He said, "Well, I'll go ask." I said, "Have at it." And I said, "It ain't gonna make no difference. I'm telling you right now, Dad's gonna say no." He said, "Well, I'll just start to cry." I'll be like, "I want to come watch," because I know how this is about to go, right? And he wasn't kidding, right? Like, he genuinely thought that this was a tactic that he likely used, probably had some success for it. It didn't that day, and but kids, you say, "Well, my kids genuinely this, that, the other." No, they're manipulating you. Yeah. Kids do that. You don't have to get very old before you realize that adults are pretty easily manipulated is what it comes down to. And children have that, mainly because you love them. And, nobody likes to see their kids cry, right? Even halfway decent adult don't like that, right? So, don't let your soul spare for their crying, because nobody else will. And really, to spare for their crying is to give them a false hope of how the world is going to treat them. That's not the way the world treats people. And frankly, it makes them not much fun to be around too, right? And so for the rest of us, we please not spare for the crying, right? Just makes them not very pleasant. And plus, so 3 things. To spare for their crying is to give them a false hope of how the world operates. Second, it makes them not fun to be around. This is just kind of practical, right? Third, kids will cry for basically nothing, right? Like this is like if you start letting your soul be affected every time your kid sheds a tear, you're going to have a lot of affected going on in your life, and probably, kids, kids like, this is the worst day ever. No, this is the worst day so far, right? Like, it gets much worse from here. And for all of us, we understand that, but, it doesn't take much for kids, right? I have 3 girls. There's not as, generally speaking, as much crying as there used to be, but, I'm like, what are you crying? I don't understand. Like, I barely even, looked at you unhappily, right? And you're, right? Just completely, it just doesn't take much to make people cry, or kids cry. So, think about a kid will spill a glass of milk and start to cry. And they may be crying because they think what you're about to do to them, but I'm just saying, they'll cry over pretty much anything. And so really what the Bible verse is saying here is crying is not a good baseline to know if this is serious, because they just do this, right? And they're trying to manipulate you. Let's look at verse number 19. A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, for if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. Really, the moral of the story, if you will, is if you bail people out, and I use the term bail, and I realize the connotation. I'm just talking about in general, right? If you bail people out, you'll have to keep bailing people out. Man of great wrath. The word wrath here is wrath. It's really not a textbook definition, more of a illustrative aspect. Wrath is anger brought to a boil, right? So we're not just talking about somebody that gets mad. We're talking about somebody that's let it get out of control in their life. Punishment is a fine or consequence imposed for wrongdoing. The word deliver means to rescue, to pull away, to snatch out, save from danger or consequences, right? We understand what these words mean. And he's saying, basically, when people are getting what they deserve, you should let them get what they deserve, right? Every once in a while, we have to stop and think. It's the Jurassic Park mantra. Instead of thinking about if you could, you should be thinking about if you should, right? And we have to be careful about saying, well, I can rescue them. Should they be rescued? Just because you can stop bad things from happening a few times, and I'm not going to let anything real bad happen, but I'm not opposed to letting little bad things happen, especially with Alicia. She's a little bit older, and she does this or does that, and I'll most of the time I'll say, I don't know about, she wants to keep going, you know what? You ain't gonna get hurt that bad doing this. So you know what? I'll let you find out the other way. Right? And maybe you'll get lucky this time, right? And it won't be bad. But you know what? But all I'm saying is, if you insist on rescuing someone every time, you know what? You'll have a full-time job rescuing them. Don't be saving people from getting what they deserve. I don't know how much of this ties specifically back to the child in the previous verse, but it sure feels like there's some application. You rescue people from choices, and you'll have to rescue them time and time again. This is an important thing to remember. Sometimes delivering people helps, and sometimes delivering people hurts. Sometimes people need to suffer the consequences of their actions to impress upon them the poor choice that they made, right? I mean, think about the worst things that have happened to you. And I'm not talking about emotionally and stuff. I'm just talking about in life. You know what? You know what will make you never not have a jack in the back of your car? Having a flat with no jack in the back of your car. Right? I use this, I just pulled that out of the air, right? I'm just saying that nothing teaches a lesson like a really bad day. And sometimes letting somebody have their bad day is the best way to teach that lesson. Listen, if people want to learn stuff the hard, sometimes we need to learn stuff the hard way. And I've found that to be quite valid teacher at times, right? Like the lessons I've learned the hardest are the lessons I've learned, are the best in one sense, are the lessons I've learned the hard way. And I think there's a verse later on. And I'm not opposed to watching you learn a lesson the hard way either, right? That helps me, but generally speaking here, right? So yeah, sometimes delivering people helps, sometimes it hurts. And really just people's actions catch up with them. Sometimes when consequences are hunting a person down, don't step in front of it. Whether it's your kid or just people in your life. So it's really of little value. There's a few cross references I could at least allude to in Proverbs chapter 13. It says, he that spareth his rod hateth his son. He that loveth him chasteneth betimes, right? Don't spare. Foolishness is bound in the heart of the child, right? All of these things are basically saying, listen, there are negative things that happen when you're a bad person, and it's not always good to rescue from them. Verse number 20 says, hear counsel on listening, hear counsel and receive instruction, that thou mayest be wise in thy latter end. So so these are some words. I looked up some words here, and I think that Proverbs oftentimes it's like, okay, what does that word even mean, right? Because there's a lot of synonymous words: instruction, wisdom, knowledge, understanding. Like, okay, so how are these working in concert? So I look these up often just to be like, so what exactly does understanding mean as opposed to knowledge? So counsel is advice, guidance, purpose, or a considered plan. The word instruction is discipline, correction, chastening, or training that forms character. So if I could kind of collapse those in on each other, counsel is what tells you the right course. Instruction corrects and trains you to follow it. Wisdom is possessing the skill to live like you ought to. So hear counsel and receive instruction. So I think that these are two steps that's being talked about, or two aspects, hear counsel and receive instruction, that are not necessarily synonymous with each other. You can hear without receiving. We have a mass safety meeting every week right after lunch, so at 12:30 on Wednesdays. And I was busy today, been busy a long time, so I actually didn't even take a lunch. So I quit what I was doing and just went to the safety meeting because I'd missed the last two because I've been busy, and so I probably should have missed three. And so I get over there, it's like about 12:28. I walk in the tent, and I'll be like, wait, what's going on here? And there's food everywhere, and there's tables set up with food, and there's marathon people everywhere. I mean, it was all Turner employees, and I'm like, what? Nobody told me nothing, right? I'm like, what's going on here? They had like a 2-year party for no recordables or anything, and they had the safety meeting kind of in lunch, and I was like, fine, I'll just go back to work then or whatever. So I just, right? And I saw our site manager later, and I'm like, hey, how did I miss that entire memo? So he said at the last two safety meetings. I'm like, oh, so that's right. So, and I think he even said the three. So, well, two of them I wasn't there, and one of them apparently I wasn't listening. So I mean, think about how often you've said in church. I give my wife a hard time about this. She'd be like, so when is this on the calendar? I'd be like, we've been announcing it for 3 months. Why do you not? And she's like, I said, well, we announced that on Sunday. I said, well, I guess I didn't hear. Like, what do you mean? You did hear it. Now, you may not have been listening to it, but you most assuredly heard it, because it's not like I think Dad said. It's like, I announced it. I'm telling you I announced it, right? There's no question here. And so that and not getting to go to the party at work today, and all of that says that you can hear things and not be listening to it. He says, hear counsel and receive instruction. Really, I think there's two escalating imperatives here. So counsel is offered, right? It's advice, guidance, purpose. Instruction is often commanded. So it's like, listen, if you won't kind of just take the counsel, you'll receive instruction. You ever, maybe it's with kids or maybe at work if you're in any position of authority, it's like you want somebody to do something and you say, well, maybe you could do it like this. And then they don't do it like this. And you're like, okay, so do it like this, right? I gave you counsel, right? Kids can be like that. I don't know that I would do that. Well, I think I would do it anyhow. Well, no, you can't, right? Like I tried, you do it the easy way or the hard way. I tried to be gentle, but if you know, and we can, I mean, you've probably had somebody do that to you. It's like, okay, we're going to do this, and they give you an opinion on how to do it. And you're like, oh, I think I'll do it like this. No, I think you'll do it the way I said. Like, I think I will do that, right? And so my point is you're much better off taking counsel than waiting till it gets to the instruction. Listen, a lot of church is, just stay with me, is group therapy, right? It's like we're giving everybody counsel at the same time. Most of it will apply to most people most of the time. And you're a lot better just coming to every church service, hearing everything that's said and interpreting it. Because if it gets much worse than that, you'll probably have, I say probably, it will be the pastor. He'll be sitting in your living room or you'll be sitting in his office, which is probably worse, right, just for the record. And he'll be saying, you need to do this. Why aren't you doing this? And he's never, I've been in the office unpleasantly only like 2 or 3 times in my life, so not at often. But what I know is he never is going to say anything in that setting that he hasn't been preaching to everybody for the last 30 years, right? So what you've done is you've put yourself in a place where you wouldn't hear the counsel, now you're getting the instruction. And it's a lot less pleasant when it gets to that point. And so the encouragement ought to be for us is, I just want the counsel. Tell me how you think I ought to do it, right? I say that in the loosest sense possible. Again, stay with the way I'm phrasing this. What do you think God wants me to do here? What do you think this verse says? Give me counsel here, because I want to avoid it. But if you ever find yourself in the proverbial office, so to speak, that's probably time to listen too, right? They're escalating. I advise the first. The second may get insisted on. And why? Why is this important? It says, that thou mayest be wise in thy latter end. That thou mayest be wise in the latter end. What you listen to today affects your tomorrow. Amen. Say, I'm having this issue in life. I'm having this issue in life. I'm having this issue in life. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say most of the issues in life that you're going to face are dealt with in church. That's right. Most of them are. Now, the thing is, it's very easy to sit in church, hear the counsel, and go home and do your own thing. Like, I don't know why everything's so wrong. Well, you're not doing anything you've been told. But what you're listening to today affects your tomorrow. That's why it's important what you listen to. Make sure you're listening to good counsel. Make sure you're listening to good instruction, i.e. probably your church and your pastor. The older I get, the longer I live, the tighter I think of what you ought to be listening to comes. And it got real tight this week, right? Like, I'm just saying, the less you need to be listening to people that know you, that you know them, and that can give you counsel. This is important in our life, and it's going to affect your tomorrow. I would argue, as kind of an aside, that's why children's formative years are so predictive, how they grow up and what they're listening to, what they're influenced in their life. The reality is with counsel and instruction, there's no such thing as neutral. Every person that has your ear is influencing you for the better or for the worse. So be careful who you spend time with. Be careful who you listen to. Be careful what you fill your mind with. Wise in the latter end requires listening and receiving on the front end. If you find yourself not in a place where, think about all the negative places you found yourself in life, and you thought, and you looked at where you're like, I knew how to avoid this. Right? It's pretty rare that you get to a place you're like, I don't even know how I got here. Now, you may say that in frustration, but if you think about it, like, are you sure you don't know how you got here? Most of us can kind of point back and say, I made this decision, I engaged in this, I listened to this person, I followed this advice, and look at where it's got me right here. So we know that all of these things tie together to influence where we're at today. If we want to be wise in our latter end, we got to be listening on the front end. Do I have some cross references? Proverbs 8, yes. Blessed is the man that heareth me. watching daily at my gates, waiting at the posts of my doors. For whoso findeth me, finding life. It's a personification of wisdom there in Proverbs chapter 8. And Proverbs 12 puts it like this: the way of a fool is right in his own eyes. Listen, just because you think you're right doesn't mean you necessarily are. You realize most everybody thinks they're right about everything? Right. However wrong they may be, most people think that. Proverbs 13:18 says it like this: poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction, but he that regardeth reproof shall be honored. Look at verse number 21 on planning. Verse number 21. There are many devices in a man's heart, nevertheless the counsel of the Lord that shall stand. So this idea of devices, right? Thoughts, plans, purposes, designs, or intentions. Counsel, it means the exact same thing that it did in the previous verse. I like, okay. Because it felt like it was used in a context. I'm like, is this a different word that we're talking about here? And it's not. So same kind of context and everything. So let's think about this idea. So there are many devices in a man's heart. So when I read the word devices, my initial, not assumption, my initial taking of that was even a worse way to put it. The way that it hits me initially, to put it like this, is it's a negative, right? And probably if I had to tie it directly to something, it's because in the New Testament it talks about the devices of the wicked one, or the devices, or be not ignorant of his devices, right? So every time I see device, I'm like, oh, it's bad, right? But the word is actually, I'm going to use this phrase kind of more morally neutral. It's good devices, bad devices, just devices, right? There's not a moral quality built into the actual thing. Because the reality is we all have plans on some level, right? So we're all going to have plans. So there's nothing wrong. In fact, you ought to have plans. There's nothing wrong with plans. You ought to be planning things. You ought to know what's your 5-year goal, personally, your 10-year goal. Like, what am I trying to do with my life here? So plans are good. I think it was Patton who said that no plan survives contact with the enemy, and I would add, or just a normal day, right? Like, it doesn't even take enemy action for things to go haywire. I mean, think about the number of days that you've gotten up and you had plans, you knew what you were going to do, and it's not even like you can remember the day. You just know that nothing went according to plan, right? I didn't expect hardly any of this to happen. So I would argue, one, a planned life is a good life, but don't forget that God also has some stuff going on that you may not be privy to necessarily. I think it's, so I at least considered, like, why does it say devices for me and counsel for the Lord? And maybe it probably is obvious on the face of it, but I would argue that counsels are more of an overarching imperative than a plan is. It's like, say, I'm planning to go to work tomorrow, right? Who else is planning on going? I'm planning on going to work tomorrow. Most of us are probably have general plans. Mom and dad are planning on going out of town. But anything could happen, right? And the thing is, the Lord has a will. He has a desire. He has counsel for tomorrow. And you know what's going to happen? I may not end up at work, but what God wanted to happen is going to happen regardless. And we have to be careful in our life to say, well, this is my plan, this is my plan, this is what I planned. And God's saying, okay, literally like, well, that's sweet, right? And we have to learn to say, hey, whatever's going on in my life, God brought this into my life. He allowed it into my life. And we need to learn to work our plans in concert with it. Think about, you ever gotten up, I don't know that this has ever happened, probably happen tomorrow now, but go up and your car won't start, you got a flat tire, you just can't get it, and you don't even end up going to work today. And like, this is the worst, right? Mom and dad are going on a trip, they go out and their car won't start at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, this is the worst, right? Like that. Now, you can't rent a car, you can call and ask somebody at 3 a.m., can we borrow your car right now for a week and a half? I guess we're not leaving for about 8 hours probably till we try to figure. And it's very easy in those circumstances to be like, I had a plan. This was a good plan. This is the plan I had worked out. And this is what I knew needed to happen. And this is what I expected to happen. I don't understand why this happened. Or you could say, actually, what's going on here is I had many devices in my heart, and the counsel of the Lord is standing today. Amen. That doesn't mean that your day is going to get magically better. That's really not the point. But we need to, in our own psychological thought process, say, hey, I have plans. God has I have plans. God has counsel, right? And whatever's going on, this is what God wanted for my life. Don't let your plans get bigger than your God. And you know that they're getting bigger than your God when your plans aren't coming to pass and you're getting really upset about it. Because what you're saying is, my plans should have taken priority over anything God had going in the entire universe today. Why isn't God allowing my plans to take place? Now, all of y'all are well enough theologically churched to know you would probably be pretty low to come out and say, why isn't God letting my plan come to pass? You're not going to say that, but if you're getting upset and bent out of shape and all frustrated, this wasn't supposed to happen, and this wasn't supposed to happen, and this wasn't supposed to happen, all that tells me you're bad at planning along the lines that God had for you. Because God's plan is for what's going to happen in our life. You have plans, God has realities, you have ambiguities. Let me give you one example. You're familiar with it, so we won't have to linger at it. In Genesis 37, 19 and 20, the story of Joseph, and they said one to another, behold, the dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what become of his dreams. And then you get all the way to Genesis chapter 50. It says, but as for me, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. It's easy to read. I mean, everybody knows the story of Joseph. So it's very easy to, even when he's being plopped in the bottom of a pit, be like, Joseph, it's all going to be okay, right? You've read the back of the book, right? You've read the whole story. And you know that, Joseph, you're going to rule Egypt one day. This is literally a temporary setback. But let you go out to go to work tomorrow and your battery is dead. And everybody loses their collective minds, right? So there's a major disconnect. Really, this is the problem. You read the story of Joseph, and even on his darkest day, you're like, hang in there, Joseph, chin up. Everything's going to work out okay. But then you have even a marginally bad day, and you're like, this is the worst, the most horrible day in the history of forever, and nothing is going according to plan. Literally, we move into, God has forsaken me. Nothing in my life is going on like I expect it to. And then you go read Joseph and say, man, Joseph, just hang in there. Everything's going to get better in the future. And you say, well, that's because I know what's going to happen with Joseph's life. Well, don't you know what's going to happen with your life ultimately? Amen. You act like there's a sense in which you have no idea what the ultimate end of my life is going to be. When I would argue, if you've accepted Christ as your Savior, I'm just as sure about how my story ends as how Joseph ends when I'm reading his. Amen. So we have to be careful about letting the bad day. I mean, I'm not even arguing that it's a bad day. What I'm arguing is, let's be careful about how we interact and react to it. Verse 22. Oh, I think we're going to quit there. Mainly because I'm going to want to spend a few minutes, more than 2 minutes on verse 22. I'm pretty sure about that. I'll read it. The desire of man is his kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. Amen. Let's have some prayer.